Hey guys, tonight we're journeying into the parched deserts of ancient Persia. Not exactly the ideal vacation spot, unless you like your sandals melted by noon. But right in the middle of all that dry, blistering heat, something miraculous happens. Rising above the clay rooftops, you spot a mysterious tower. It's not ornate, it's not flashy, but somehow it hums with purpose. Down below, in the shadows, someone sipping cool water from a ceramic jug, a curl of condensation trailing down the side. Welcome to a world where ice existed without freezers, and air conditioning was powered by the breeze. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love knowing which part of the world is snoozing with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly through a bleached Persian street, sand swirling around your ankles like restless spirits. It's hot enough to fry a falafel on the cobblestones, and every instinct screams, find shade, find water, find a way to not melt into a historical puddle. That's when you catch it. A peculiar tower poking above the skyline, narrow and open at the top, like a chimney in reverse. A breeze brushes your face. A cool one. You follow it, of course. The buildings shift from market stalls to walled homes, each topped with these curious structures. Some have multiple fluted spires like an organ, others just one solemn slit facing the wind. Children dart between them, barefoot and laughing, while older folks lounge near the walls, cloaked in shadows that seem suspiciously cooler than they should be. This isn't just architecture. This is ancient science hiding in plain sight. You're led to a modest home by a boy with a fig-stained smile. He points upward, proud of his family's badger, a wind catcher. It's not much to look at, just a mud brick box with slits. But when you step inside, something magical happens. The air shifts, it moves. Cool currents swirl around you, as if the building itself is exhaling. You're standing in a centuries-old form of natural air conditioning. Historians still argue whether the earliest wind catchers appeared in Persia or Egypt. But what's certain is that by around 400 BCE, Persians were perfecting them. They'd figured out how to capture desert winds and direct them down through homes and into underground chambers. Not just to ventilate, but to chill. Think of it like DIY climate control, only with no buttons and a lot more Adobe. There's even an ancient Persian joke, or perhaps just a really committed dad joke, that goes something like, "Why marry a man with no wind tower? He can't keep his cool." You chuckle politely and pretend you didn't just make that up. You explore the courtyard. It's designed like a giant clay funnel, with narrow corridors that encourage airflow. Everything here has a function. The thick walls absorb heat during the day and release it at night. The pale tiles reflect the sunlight. Even the plants play a part. Placing trees strategically for maximum shade wasn't just aesthetics, it was survival. A nearby woman pours water into a shallow stone basin. Instantly, the breeze intensifies, skimming across the surface and carrying moisture into the air. It feels like a sudden drop in temperature, and you blink, surprised. The Persians knew evaporation is nature's coolant. Combined with their architectural tricks, they were pulling off climate miracles in the middle of a desert. And what's wild, they weren't just cooling people, they were chilling perishables. There's a clay pot tucked into a nook, cradling grapes and soft cheese. It's noticeably cooler than the rest of the room. How? That humble pot is part of the secret. Called a zir. It's a double-layered vessel, porous and damp, allowing the water between its layers to evaporate and cool the interior. It's an ancient fridge with zero electricity and maximum cleverness. You sit on a cushion. Someone offers you a glass of sour cherry juice, and the clay cup is cool to the touch. You sip. Tart, refreshing, delicious. Not bad for a civilization with no ice cubes. Here's a quirky tidbit some wealthier households added perfumed water to their wind catchers. That way, every breeze came laced with rose or citrus, smells like luxury, and a tiny bit of passive, aggressive bragging. As twilight settles, the temperature outside begins to drop fast, a desert quirk that made these systems even more efficient. That nighttime chill will play a vital role in what happens next, especially when we get to the mysterious ice domes and snow hauling caravans. But for now, you lean back, head tilted toward the slatted ceiling where the breeze trickles down. The wind catcher whispers through the house like a lullaby, and you start to wonder why we ever bothered inventing air conditioners. You pad softly across the packed earth courtyard, your sandals silent as you follow the juice-bearing woman toward a domed structure tucked behind the main house. It rises from the ground like a half-buried clay UFO, rounded and slightly cracked with age. There's no grand entrance, just a narrow slit of a door and a noticeable drop in temperature as you duck inside. You shiver, for real this time. Welcome to the Yakshal, the ice pit, the Persian snow bunker, whatever you want to call it. You're standing in a miracle of ancient engineering. And no, you're not hallucinating. That's actual ice down there. You creep closer to the edge of a descending ramp. It spirals around the inner wall, like a snail shell, leading down into the chill. The air grows heavier with each step, cool and damp, and oddly metallic on your tongue. At the very bottom, you see it ice. Real, glistening, solid ice, packed into mounds and wrapped in straw mats like precious treasure. How did they do it? It's like nature just gave them the middle finger with all that heat and they coolly flipped it back. The Yakshal, which literally translates to ice pit, combines several genius elements: thick insulating walls made from a special mud, straw ash blend, a dome to minimize heat absorption, subterranean depth for naturally lower temps, and often a direct channel from the wind catcher above, pushing cooler air into the pit and cycling warmer air out. It's passive refrigeration, ancient style. And yes, sometimes they stored ice here that was manually hauled down from mountain peaks, but more often they made it right here, in the desert. At night, you run your fingers along the dome's inner wall. It's rough, dense, almost waxy. That's intentional. The mixture is waterproof, insulating, and tough enough to last centuries. Some yakshals are still standing after 500 years. Meanwhile, your apartment fridge has a 2-year warranty and cries every time the power flickers. Historians still argue whether the primary function of early yakshals was ice storage, food preservation, or ritual use. There's even a theory that some acted as seasonal tombs for perishable offerings. Whatever their original purpose, by the Achaemenid era, think 550 to 330 BCE, ice making had become a full-blown civic service. Cities had dedicated workers, let's call them ice wranglers, who oversaw the freezing, storing, and distributing of these wintry treasures. You can almost hear the echoes of them at work, the scraping of ice tools, the rustle of straw mats being rolled open, the soft thud of a snowball lobbed during a slow shift. Here's a fun, slightly absurd fact. Some yakshals had secret escape tunnels, not for robbers or warlords, but to prevent ice theft. That's right, black market popsicles. In a place where a cold drink was the height of luxury, a chunk of ice was more valuable than gold teeth on a jackal. The woman gestures toward a smaller pit near the main mound. It's filled not with ice, but with clay jars. You peer in. More grapes, more cheese. Even a few flasks of something that smells suspiciously like fermented pomegranate. Ancient slushy. Anyone. You linger for a while, just letting the calm seep in. The quiet hum of moving air from the badger above. The soft drip of melting frost. The gentle hush of earth cradling cold. If you lie down right now, you might fall asleep and wake up as a very confused time traveler in a snow-bearded toga. Eventually, you climb back up. The sunlight stings after the yakshal's cool embrace, but the mystery has only deepened. You're starting to grasp just how sophisticated the ancient Persians really were. Not just warriors and poets, but environmental engineers who turned their unforgiving landscape into an asset. Outside, you glance up at the wind tower again. It makes sense now. This wasn't some pretty rooftop feature. It was part of a system. A network of passive technology that spanned cities, homes, even empires. And it wasn't just for ice. The system stored grain, preserved meat, kept dates from going gooey in the sun. It allowed for medicines that needed cooler temperatures, for long-distance trade without spoilage, for the simple joy of sipping something cold at sunset. You smile. This is the kind of boring history that's secretly wild. You spend the next morning wandering the town, shadows shrinking. As the sun climbs, the air grows heavier, thicker. Even the lizards seem to have given up, plastered lazily against the walls like hot, little bookmarks. But then, another breeze. Not from the sky, but from the side. It curls around your face, cool and deliberate. You follow it to the source, another badger, standing proud atop a clay house, like a lazy lighthouse. You're about to get very intimate with the ancient Persian windcatcher. This one's taller, more elaborate than the last. It towers at least 30 feet above the roof, with 4 directional slits. Like it's sniffing the air for gossip, a small wooden ladder leans against the interior wall, and before you can think too hard about safety standards, you're climbing. At the top, your hair? Well, metaphorical hair if you're bald tonight, lifts in the breeze. It's like standing at the mouth of an invisible river, the wind funneled and focused through narrow slats and clever geometry. Here's the trick: badgers weren't just passive funnels. They were active regulators. Depending on which way the wind blew, internal flaps or vanes could shift the direction, pushing cool air down into rooms, or drawing warm air up and out. Some towers had damp mats hung inside to moisten the airflow, a fragrant blend of air conditioning and spa day. You're inside a natural chimney of wind, and below you, that wind pours into a shaft leading down to the living quarters, then further, still into the yakshal. The cycle is endless: wind enters, heat escapes, cool remains. The Persians weren't catching the wind, they were training it. Historians still argue whether the earliest wind catchers were invented independently across cultures or traded along Silk Road routes. What's clear is that Persians mastered the form, refining it over centuries to suit different environments. In humid southern cities like Yazd, the towers were taller, more ventilated. In drier inland towns, they were shorter and sealed tighter, like bespoke desert tuxedos tailored for breeze. Here's a quirky gem: some wind catchers doubled as listening posts. Because they magnified airflow noise, they also carried whispers. Kids would dare each other to eavesdrop near the towers, hoping to catch secrets, only to hear mostly exaggerated sneezes and goat bleats. You descend slowly, tracing your fingers along the interior fluting. It's dusty but smooth, shaped with care. At the base, the cool draft pools in a sunken sitting area. Cushions line the floor, and ceramic tiles glisten faintly with moisture. You plop down, grateful. It feels 10 degrees cooler here. You almost expect a waiter to bring you iced tea, maybe with a decorative mint leaf. Ancient Hospitality Deluxe Edition. A merchant wanders in from the courtyard, holding a scroll. He nods toward the airflow, clearly proud of it. You can almost hear him explaining how the entire city's layout maximizes wind direction. Streets aligned for optimal breeze capture. Buildings staggered to prevent stagnation. This wasn't just home comfort. It was city-scale climate hacking. And speaking of large-scale, some palaces had multiple badgers, working in tandem like the pipes of a cathedral organ. When one caught a breeze, the others adjusted, creating a pressure system that kept air circulating across dozens of rooms. That's not architecture, that's symphony. You pause to consider something all this achieved without electricity, motors, or metal fans. Just math, mud, and a deep understanding of wind. It's humbling. You, with your smart thermostat and energy bill panic, suddenly feel like a caveman with a space heater. At one point, a cat strolls in and curls up right in the airflow's path, smart creature. It stretches luxuriously, eyes half closed, as if to say, "Took you long enough to find the good spot." Outside, someone's calling for help. Turns out a traveling Greek diplomat is stuck halfway up another tower, trying to measure its angles. You chuckle, they'll get it eventually. Maybe. Or maybe they'll just take the blueprints home and slap a column on it. Back in your cool corner, you lie down. The hum of moving air becomes a lullaby again. It's the sound of silence engineered, a whisper from centuries ago that says, "Rest easy. We've got the airflow figured out." You stretch and wander out into the broader sprawl of the town, which now feels more like a living lab of ancient cooling. The wind catchers are just the beginning. This whole environment, it turns out, is a carefully tuned machine for battling heat. And now you're going to see how water and walls join forces with wind to keep everyone from slow roasting. Down a narrow alley, you reach a cluster of buildings surrounding a sunken courtyard. The air is cooler here, but the real magic starts when you spot the trickle of water dancing along the edges. It's not a decorative pond. It's part of an ancient Persian cooling network. A slender stone channel, barely wide enough for your fingers, snakes across the yard and disappears beneath the buildings. That's a qanat, and you're going to follow it like a curious cat on a treasure hunt. Qanats are underground aqueducts, engineered to carry water from distant mountain sources all the way to thirsty cities and farms. They slope gently, using gravity to move water without pumps or pipes. And the kicker, because they run underground, they stay cool. Perfect for feeding those subterranean yak shells and splashing into shallow pools that cool the air by evaporation. You dip your fingers into the stream. It's refreshingly cold, even in the midday sun. The breeze from a nearby badger passes over it, and instantly the air temperature around you drops another few degrees. It's like stepping into nature's version of a refrigerator isle. Historians still argue whether qanats were originally Persian inventions or adapted from earlier Mesopotamian ideas, but there's little debate about who perfected them. Some qanats still function today, ancient infrastructure that's outlived every empire that leaned on it. Your guide, a grizzled man with sun-worn skin and a straw hat, gestures toward a low archway. You duck through it and enter a shaded chamber with a gently sloped floor and clay-tiled walls. This, he explains, is a serdab, a summer room built underground, sometimes partially beneath the yakshal, and designed to stay cool through a mix of architecture and water engineering. The walls here are thick, like fortress thick. Sunlight barely reaches inside, and every surface is designed to either absorb heat slowly or reflect it altogether. A breeze trickles in from a high slit near the ceiling. Yep, another badger at work, and sweeps over a shallow basin in the center of the room. It's lined with glazed tiles catching light in gentle ripples. Together, the airflow and evaporating water create a soft, constant chill. The air smells faintly of clay moss and something citrusy, maybe a leftover from yesterday's perfume basin. You breathe deeply. It's the smell of smart architecture. Here's a quirky gem for your trivia bank. Wealthy households used to sprinkle rosewater or orange blossom water into these pools. Not just for scent, but because evaporating fragrant water was believed to cleanse the air. Today, you use plug and air fresheners. Back then, they engineered the breeze to carry scent on purpose. A literal breath of fresh air. Outside, the buildings hug the landscape in ways you're only now starting to appreciate. Streets curve not randomly, but to align with prevailing winds. Homes face certain directions, deliberately, maximizing exposure to morning shade or evening breezes. Even the rooftops are part of the strategy. Flat and open for sleeping on cooler nights, or sloped to catch the rare rain. You pass a group of kids splashing in a tiny canal. They're laughing, tossing water onto the paving stones around them. Why? Because even this is climate control. Wet stones cool faster and stay cooler longer, creating little islands of relief across the courtyard. And here's a detail that might just blow your modern mind. Some Persian cities used white, washed walls and reflective surfaces to bounce sunlight away. Centuries before, cool roof technology became trendy in Western architecture. In Yazid, they even experimented with materials to insulate from heat while reflecting light. That's right, hipster vibes brought to you by the 5th century BCE. As the sun begins to dip again, you find yourself tucked into another shady corner, lulled by the gentle gurgle of water and the rhythmic hush of wind sliding through narrow passageways. The entire place feels like it's breathing with you. Inhale with the breeze, exhale with the warmth it carries away. You're not just exploring old buildings, you're witnessing a philosophy. The ancient Persians didn't conquer their climate, they worked with it, tuned their lives to its rhythms, built their homes to honor its rules. One last gust brushes your cheek as if to say, now you understand. And you do. Sort of. At least enough to crave your own wind catcher and a shady courtyard with whispering walls. You're following the faint crunch of straw beneath sandaled feet now, trailing behind a caravan that seems absurdly out of place in this sun-baked stillness. Camels grunt as they plod forward, each one burdened not with silks or spices, but something far more curious: bundles of tightly wrapped straw, packed to the brim and glistening slightly at the edges. Ice. Actual snow and ice. Welcome to one of the strangest logistical operations of the ancient Persian world. The Snow Delivery Squad. You blink under the blazing sun, trying to imagine the mountain peaks from which this caravan must have descended. Somewhere up there, where the Zagros Mountains scrape the sky, winter never fully dies. That's where this frozen cargo begins its journey, cut into dense blocks, tightly wrapped in insulating materials, straw, wool, even layers of goat skin, and stacked onto camels for a race against time and temperature. The entire trip is choreographed like a ballet. Night travel to avoid solar heat, shaded resting stations known as Baravarga, and emergency pits dug along the route in case a block starts to melt prematurely. It's delicate, ridiculous, and somehow it works. Historians still argue whether this snow hauling system was a widespread practice or reserved for royal households and elite cities, but traces of snow transportation routes have been found across several Persian regions, suggesting it wasn't just an emperor's indulgence. Ice was a serious business. You settle up to one of the handlers, a young man with sunburned cheeks and straw clinging to his beard. He chuckles as you peer into the load, revealing a block of snow so pure and compact it could be a sculptor's dream. He explains, using a few words and many gestures, that this batch is bound for a temple ceremony. The high priests will melt the ice in a ritual basin to symbolize winter's offering to the gods. Yeah, you weren't expecting theology with your popsicles, were you? You pass a checkpoint where the caravan swaps ice packs between camels. The heat has already started to nibble at the corners of some bundles, and the crew moves quickly. There's a rhythm to their work, almost like a dance, and no wasted motion. You overhear someone mutter about a caravan last season that lost half its load because a camel sneezed into a snow pit and nobody noticed. That's the ancient logistics version of spilling your coffee on a laptop. As you march along, your guide explains another purpose for the snow public festivals. In wealthier cities, snow was heaped into basins in public squares, forming makeshift cool zones where townsfolk gathered to cool off, drink chilled syrupy drinks, or, believe it or not, stage early versions of snowball fights. That's right. In the middle of the desert, someone thought, let's weaponize frozen water into fun. Humanity undefeated. Here's a quirky detail for you. In some records, high-ranking officials are noted to have servants whose sole duty was ice tender. These were not just glorified ice cream men. They tracked usage, monitored melting, and even delivered cubes to the nobility in elegant dishes shaped like lotuses or lions. When someone asked if they were cool under pressure, it was probably literal. The caravan finally reaches a city gate. You watch as ice blocks are carefully handed off to a smaller team who scurry them away into nearby storage domes. Mini yachtels, like the one you saw earlier. The transfer is almost reverent. Each block of ice is a victory over physics, a reminder that even the desert can be chilled with enough ingenuity and elbow grease. As the sun sets and the temperature dips, you find yourself lingering at the edge of the city square, where a small crowd has gathered. A basin filled with imported snow sits in the center. Children press their hands to it, gasp at the cold, then run laughing into their parents' arms. One bold little girl scoops a handful and lobs it gently at a friend, setting off a flurry of delighted shrieks. You sit down nearby, sip a clay cup of chilled tamarind water, and marvel at the absurdity and brilliance of it all. This was no casual effort. This was a culture that saw the impossible and decided, well, we'll just bring the snow here. Not for glory, not even just for comfort, but because coolness, in every sense, was worth the climb. The stars begin to blink above. Somewhere, a caravan is already preparing to do it all again tomorrow. The next night, you're led beyond the edge of the town, out where the desert lies quiet and flat under a velvet sky. No towers here, no walls, just the hush of sand and a low cluster of activity that glows gently under moonlight. At first glance, it looks like a bizarre outdoor dinner party, with rows of shallow clay basins spread across the ground and people moving silently among them. But you quickly realize this isn't dinner. This is ice making, Persian style. You've stumbled upon one of the most surreal rituals of ancient life. Midnight ice farming. The process is stunningly simple, and yet it feels like alchemy. Each night, shallow pools of water are poured into sunken beds, lined with insulating clay. The desert's dry air and plummeting nighttime temperatures work in tandem, freezing the surface water by dawn. But here's the twist. The deeper secret is not the air, it's radiation. As the heat of the water radiates into the wide, cloudless sky, it dissipates more efficiently than it would in any enclosed space. It's like the earth itself is whispering cold into the open air. You kneel beside one of the trays. The water is still for now, just waiting. The farmer beside you, barefoot, calm, explains with a slow wave how each basin is carefully aligned with the stars. They don't just throw water around. They study the weather, the sky, the wind. No clouds tonight. Perfect. No breeze? Not so good. Timing is everything. It's a delicate balance of temperature, humidity, and a touch of luck. Historians still argue whether these techniques originated purely from Persian invention or if they borrowed inspiration from similar nighttime freezing methods used in the Indian subcontinent. What's agreed upon is this: the Persians scaled the method with precision, turning a weird weather quirk into a nightly production line for cold. Every so often, someone tiptoes over and gently breaks the newly formed ice layer with a flat wooden blade, sliding it into baskets lined with straw. The thinner the ice, the faster it's harvested. There's no time to waste. Morning heat is a cruel opponent. And here's a delightfully quirky tidbit. It was considered good fortune to slip on the first slick patch of ice each season. Not because injury was fun, but because it meant the frost had arrived early and profits would rise. Some kids even faked falls for luck. Slapstick economics, ancient edition. You take a turn pouring water into a fresh tray. The clay is cold under your hands, the water glistening in the moonlight. There's a quiet dignity to the motion, like painting with liquid hope. You're contributing to tomorrow's yakshal stock, or maybe a wedding feast needing chilled wine, or possibly even an offering to some half-forgotten god of cold breezes. You don't ask. It's better as a mystery. As the hours drift by, you notice how the group works without talking much. Communication happens through soft gestures, hand signals, the occasional whisper. It's not just tradition, it's tactical. Loud noises disturb airflow. Even the smallest disruption can warm the air a degree or two, enough to sabotage the freezing process. So they stay quiet and let the science do its thing. By dawn, the horizon blushes with light. Most of the trays are harvested, baskets piled with thin glass like ice sheets. The workers move faster now, racing the sun. You help haul one load back toward the village, your breath misting as the last of the night's chill clings to the air. A boy nudges you, pointing toward a tray where a perfect, palm-sized disc of ice sits untouched. For you? He says you crouch, lift it carefully. It's thin, translucent, and cold enough to sting your fingers. You hold it up to the sky just as the first sunlight catches its edge. It's beautiful. Temporary. Entirely too much effort for something that will melt by lunch. And yet, worth it. Back in town, you set the disc gently onto a pile inside a storage pit. It joins dozens of others, slowly preserving themselves in the cool, shadowed dome of a yakchal. They'll be used over the next day or two, and the cycle will repeat every night, every winter. Every generation that cared enough to chase cold in a land of fire. You sit at the yakchal's mouth, watching the last star fade. The desert's silence is returning, but now you know it hums with potential. Every grain of sand a silent witness to 1,000. Your obsession with staying chill. You wake up nestled in a courtyard soaked in morning shadow, the sun just beginning to edge over the adobe walls like a nosy neighbor peeking into your breakfast. The air is still delightfully cool, thanks to everything you've seen in action. The wind towers humming softly, the yakchal cradling its icy heart, and somewhere deep below, Khanats whispering water through their underground arteries. But now, you're going to understand how the very bones of Persian architecture helped make all this possible. You stand and stretch, casting your eyes around the courtyard like a lazy archaeologist. It's simple at first glance. Mud brick walls, arched colonnades, a couple of potted plants that look like they've been here since Cyrus the Great. But then you notice the subtleties, the way the walls angle inward, ever so slightly, the deliberate curve of the archways, the positioning of open spaces, shaded balconies, and vents placed just so. This house, like thousands in ancient Persia, wasn't built just to stand. It was built to breathe. Every design element is a deliberate move in a centuries-old chess game against heat. The courtyard itself acts as a thermal battery, absorbing the sun's warmth during the day and releasing it at night, keeping temperatures relatively stable. The walls are made from sun-dried adobe, thick as bookcases, which means they hold on to the night's chill long after the sun rises. You run your hand across the plaster. It's surprisingly cool, as if the wall still remembers the stars. Even the color, a soft, dusty cream, is strategic. Lighter surfaces reflect sunlight, while darker tones absorb it. Persian architects, basically the original influencers of cool tone aesthetics, you wander into the living quarters. There's no front door in the Western sense, just a modest curtain and a sudden plunge in temperature. That's thanks to the tall entry vestibule, called a hashti, which acts like a thermal airlock. It interrupts airflow and blocks hot gusts from blasting through the house like a dragon with allergies. Historians still argue whether Persian domestic architecture was more influenced by environmental needs or cultural customs of modesty and hospitality. The answer probably is both. You wanted comfort, sure, but you also didn't want Uncle Jamshid wandering in during your nap. Balance. As you explore deeper, you enter a sardab, an underground room whose name literally means cold basement. And yes, it delivers. Here, the walls are rounded and windowless, the floor sunken and often lined with clay tiles or stone slabs. The wind catcher above breathes life into the space, circulating cool air that has been filtered through damp pads or water channels along the floor. It's so comfortable. You half expect a sign that says, "Please remove sandals and existential dread." But the architectural genius doesn't stop at airflow. Many of these homes used kesht, a type of mud brick made with specific ratios of clay and straw, dried in the sun, and often reinforced with natural resin or lime to enhance durability and thermal resistance. The bricks were laid in staggered patterns to maximize strength and help with insulation, and the ceilings domed. Not just because domes look majestic, although they do, but because domes are thermally efficient. Hot air rises into the high curve, leaving the lower part of the room cooler. It's the ancient version of pushing your blanket off just your feet. Here's a delightful oddity. Even the stables were designed with airflow in mind. A proper Persian donkey, it seems, deserved a breeze too. Ventilation flues, shaded feeding areas, and sometimes even miniature wind catchers were included in livestock quarters. Spoiled, maybe. But if your goat is fainting from heat stroke, you're not getting milk tomorrow. You settle into a corner, near the kitchen, where a clever system of wall vents draws smoke and heat away, redirecting it through channels that warm upper level walls during winter. Multi-seasonal, multifunctional, multi-genius. Outside, you hear the clatter of breakfast prep, flatbread on hot stones, a kettle bubbling with something that smells like mint and mystery. You realize how seamlessly the architecture supports daily life. This isn't just about cooling, it's about flow, movement, rhythm. The house doesn't fight nature, it dances with it. And here's a fun fact to sip with your tea. Archaeologists have found architectural manuals from the Sassanid era, circa 2024, 651 CE, that detail precise measurements for optimizing air circulation based on room size and geographic orientation. These weren't folk traditions. This was architectural science. As you recline again in the shady courtyard, the breeze gently nosing at your collar, you realize you're no longer surprised by any of it. The Persians weren't just building shelter, they were designing comfort. With mud and math, in the middle of the desert. And honestly, your apartment kind of sucks now by comparison. Late afternoon finds you somewhere you absolutely shouldn't be, which, let's be honest, hasn't stopped you before. You've slipped through the sandstone alleys of a vast, ceremonial complex, past guards too tired to notice and historians too focused on their scrolls. And now here you are standing inside a royal palace in Persepolis. Not the main hall, not the throne room. No, you're in the side wing, where someone with influence and impeccable taste is setting out a fruit platter chilled by ancient desert wizardry. A silver tray glistens before you, heavy with figs, grapes, sliced melons, and pomegranate seeds so cold they sparkle like jewels. You reach for a piece, let's say in the name of historical accuracy, and feel the chill before your fingers touch the metal. That's not just from the fruit. The whole table is kept cool by underground airflow and a hidden channel of running water beneath the floor. You crouch and peek under the edge of the dais. There it is, a system of clay ducts, drawing air from a nearby wind catcher and funneling it across the moist surface of the tiles, which are laid atop a shallow connat stream. It's like the dessert cart mated with an HVAC system. You plop a chilled grape in your mouth. It pops with tart sweetness and icy refreshment. This isn't just architecture. This is architecture in service of indulgence. Historians still argue whether this type of palace level cooling tech was exclusive to royalty or if it trickled down into elite merchant homes. What's clear is that the craftsmanship was meticulous and the experience divine. The room is decorated not with gaudy gold but with soft hues, blue tiles, carved stucco, and shaded windows made of alabaster that filter the light into a pale, comforting glow. It's a palace, yes, but one built to soothe rather than stun. You make your way down a marble hallway, cool to the touch, past servants with fans, more symbolic than functional, since the badgers have most of the breeze, handling under control. One of them nods toward an antechamber, where water trickles from a small fountain. You enter and find a low divan set beside another fruit tray. This one surrounded by bowls of snow, likely hauled in from that same caravan you saw earlier. And here's your quirky trivia treat. Some palace hosts would hide messages or tiny favors inside balls of snow, presenting them to guests like chilly fortune cookies. One tablet even describes a game, where courtiers guessed the weight of a snowball, winner getting the first slice of chilled melon. Ancient Persian icebreakers. Literally, a soft, spoken steward appears, offering you a cup of chilled wine infused with herbs. The cup itself is double, layered clay, and condensation beads between the layers. No hand, dripping mess here. Even the drinkware has cooling tech. You lounge, you sip, and you realize everything around you, the ceilings, the pillars, the flow of air and water, is designed to maintain equilibrium, not just temperature-wise, but emotionally. Persian elite spaces weren't about domination or intimidation. They were about balance, serenity, a good breeze and a better conversation. A scholar nearby flips through a scroll, muttering something about the principle of thermal harmony, an architectural theory that aligned not just air and water, but the rhythms of day and night, of feasting and fasting, of solitude and society. You smile. The ancient Persians, basically feng shui, ed their entire empire. Outside, music starts up in a garden. Flutes, hand drums, the kind of sound that makes your shoulders drop and your feet want to dance just a little. You follow it, stepping into a lush, walled garden, bursting with cypress, jasmine, and tiny channels of flowing water. It's a paradisia? Yes, that's where the word paradise comes from. And it's not just pretty. It's a masterclass in passive cooling. The water channels guide breezes across their surfaces and into shaded alcoves. The foliage filters sunlight, while the surrounding walls reflect it away. You stroll slowly, tasting pomegranate and breathing in damp earth and rose petals. At one corner, a pavilion offers more cold drinks, stored in jars, buried up to their necks in cool earth. Each one's been swirled in a stone trove for hours to reach the perfect temperature. And here you thought your mini fridge was impressive. You recline under a cypress, the music drifting like wind over water. You understand now, to the Persians, coolness wasn't just about relief. It was about grace, about showing mastery not through brute force, but by coaxing comfort from an unyielding land. The sun dips. The sky turns violet, and the breeze, still moving. Always moving. You're drowsy now, pleasantly full of fruit, and lulled by the scent of jasmine and the whisper of fountains. But history, like a persistent bedtime story, has more pages to turn. So you roll over, figuratively speaking, and let the dream carry you further back, past the Persian Empire's golden days, and into the world of their predecessors. Because to truly understand how clever the Persians were, you've got to peek over the fence at their slightly older, slightly more dramatic cousins, the Babylonians. You find yourself on the vast, sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia, where ziggurats rise like ancient skyscrapers. The wind here is hot and smells of dust and burnt offerings. You wander through a Babylonian courtyard, and wouldn't you know it, they, too, have water channels. Not as sophisticated, maybe, but definitely functional. The shadows are welcome, and you spot wide, brimmed basins near doors, likely for evaporative cooling. It's like a rough draft of everything you just saw perfected in Persia. You duck into a shrine, cooler inside, thanks to thick walls and limited windows, and find a relief on the wall. It shows a structure with slanted vents. Historians still argue whether these were early wind catchers or just clever ventilation shafts, but the resemblance is uncanny. Either way, it's clear the Mesopotamians were starting to understand the relationship between air, water, and temperature. Here's a curious tidbit. Babylonian priests would sometimes place pots of water near temple altars, not just for ritual cleanliness, but to cool the air during ceremonies. Imagine sweating through a sacred rite in 50 degrees Celsius weather. No one's reaching enlightenment like that. As you step outside, the difference becomes obvious. The Persians didn't invent environmental design, they inherited the idea. But they scaled it, refined it, and made it beautiful. Where the Babylonians built functionally, the Persians built poetically. You flash forward again, no button pressing required, and land in the Achaemenid era, where Persian engineers are busy scribbling notes, sketching airflows, testing wall thicknesses. They're not reinventing the wheel. They're gilding it, aerodynamically optimizing it, and maybe throwing a dinner party on top of it. You peer over one engineer's shoulder. He's comparing two diagrams. One of a Babylonian ziggurat with vent-like structures, and one of a multi-slotted wind catcher like the ones you've seen all over Persia. He mutters to himself, adjusts a line, and adds an extra duct, innovation by iteration. An ancient engineer's version of creux plaisir. Here's a fun mental snack. Scholars have debated whether knowledge about climate-sensitive architecture traveled via trade routes or military campaigns. After all, when the Persian Empire expanded west, they didn't just take gold, they took blueprints. Cultural osmosis, with a side of conquest. As you stroll back into Persian territory, you begin to see the architectural lineage. The tall columns of Persepolis owe something to Mesopotamian temple design. The water channels running beneath city plazas, an evolution of Sumerian irrigation systems. The domed ice pits, well, those are purely Persian, but they sit on a foundation of centuries of borrowed brilliance. You pass a young builder discussing dome angles with his mentor. They argue over the optimal height for a wind catcher. The old man insists on tradition. The youth sketches a modification that might catch a different breeze. You smile. Even then, progress came with a bit of grumbling. And now, a quirky nugget from the dusty corners of historical gossip. When Babylonian architects were first shown a Persian wind tower, one reportedly called it a reed flute that thinks it's a god. Jealousy, it seems, has excellent comedic timing. By the time you wander back into a Persian village, you feel a strange sense of continuity. Every brick you step over, every shadow you cool beneath, carries echoes of older empires. The Persians were clever, yes, but also humble enough to learn, adapt, and elevate. The sun dips again, casting long golden streaks across domed rooftops and slatted towers. You rest beside a badger, the breeze brushing your cheek like the fingers of time itself. Behind you, a child draws a wind tower in the sand. Not just copying, improving. You're not entirely sure when you wandered into the garden, but now you're here, draped across a stone bench as the scent of roses swirls around you like a silk scarf on a breeze. This isn't just a random patch of greenery. It's a Persian paradise, quite literally. A paradise, a walled garden engineered not only for beauty, but for microclimate magic. And tonight, your nose is about to take the lead in this historical exploration. The air here isn't just cool, it's fragrant. And not in that hit, you like a perfume shop way, more like a gentle murmur of citrus basil, and the softest whisper of jasmine. You take a deep breath, and your shoulders instantly drop. Ancient Persian garden designers knew what they were doing. They crafted environments where scent and temperature teamed up to create pockets of serene delight. You stroll slowly along a tiled path, following a stream that trickles beside you. The water isn't just for show. It's part of the climate control. Flowing water helps cool the air through evaporation, especially when paired with the strategic placement of breezy corridors and shaded alcoves. But here's the twist, those lovely smells. They're not just pleasant, they're purposeful. Planting perfumed herbs and flowers wasn't merely aesthetic. The Persians believed that certain scents, like rose, mint, and sweet basil, could lower the perception of heat. It's not just about science, it's about psychology. And honestly, it works. Your brain feels cooler just thinking. Mint. Historians still argue whether the sensory design of Persian gardens influenced their architecture, or vice versa. What's certain is that every element had intention. Flower beds were placed where the wind would most likely carry their scent into homes. Trees were planted in precise rows to filter sunlight, while creating airflow corridors. Even gravel paths were chosen based on how their color and texture interacted with light and heat. You pass under a trellis woven thick with grapevines. Shadows dapple the path below, and another breeze glides through. It's like walking through a living AC unit designed by Mother Nature and maintained by poets. Here's a quirky little detail in some royal gardens. Perfumed water was poured into the fountains. Not just petals floating on top, but actual rosewater or citrus oil added to the current. When the breeze passed over the surface, it lifted the aroma and carried it into open rooms, shaded halls, and even bathhouses. You can almost hear some smug gardener muttering, "Eat that, Rome." You pause by a pavilion with low stone benches, a tea tray glinting in the dusk light. A servant offers you a cup of something floral and ice, cold, again, chilled with wind and water, no sorcery required. You sip. It tastes like springtime, like cool marble, like a nap under the stars. Beyond the pavilion, a small dome rises from the far corner of the garden. It's a private retreat, insulated with thick walls and topped with a narrow wind catcher. Inside, the air is cooler still, thanks to the garden's layered design. Every outer wall, every bush and vine, acts as a buffer, reducing sunlight, filtering air, and modulating the breeze. The deeper you go, the cooler it gets. It's not unlike the logic of a Russian nesting doll. If the smallest space is protected by everything else, it stays the most comfortable. You lie back on a cushion in the dome. Outside, the fountain gurgles softly. A breeze flutters through, carrying the scent of orange blossoms. Somewhere, someone laughs quietly. It's not just a good moment. It's a curated experience. And for the Persian elite, this was the goal. Gardens weren't just about beauty. They were about control, about crafting a space that defied the desert's brutality and offered a taste of harmony, a literal paradise in both the poetic and architectural sense. One last curious fact before you nod off. The Quran describes paradise as a garden with flowing rivers and eternal shade, a vision directly inspired by Persian paradise. When your backyard becomes the blueprint for heaven, you know you're doing landscaping right. The sky deepens into indigo, and fireflies blink like ancient light bulbs strung along the grapevines. The scent of basil and rose mingles in the air, and you realize your nose has never had such a good day. You're lounging now in the softened twilight, half dozing in that citrus-laced breeze, when a new voice cuts through the calm. It's accented, dramatic, and very obviously not local. A man in a polished linen tunic stumbles into the garden, sweat already dripping from his forehead, his scroll case clutched like a lifeline. He's a Greek envoy, and he's having a full-on climate crisis. You perk up, because nothing spices up an ancient garden like a bit of cultural envy. The envoy is muttering to himself in a rapid, fire blend of Greek and sighs. How is it? Why is it? Cold fruit? In a desert? He wipes his brow and nearly topples over a pot of mint, and glares at a clay cup of chilled pomegranate juice like it's mocking him. To be fair, it kind of is. You slink behind a nearby column, and watch as he flops down on a bench, pulls out a scroll, and begins furiously sketching the wind tower peaking just above the garden wall. His notes are rambling, something about divine breezes, cheating the sun, and possibly witchcraft. We'll investigate. You're witnessing one of the ancient world's earliest episodes of architectural FOMO. Historians still argue whether Persian cooling tech directly influenced later Greek and Roman innovations, but this kind of first-hand exposure makes a strong case. Greek emissaries sent to Persepolis and Susa often returned home raving less about the political alliances and more about the iced drinks and perfumed courtyards. One even wrote that Persian gardens were where the soul goes to bathe in shadow. Not bad for diplomatic feedback. Here's a quirky little gem. Some Greek engineers reportedly tried to recreate badgers in their Mediterranean villas. They misunderstood the mechanics, of course, and ended up building what was essentially a fancy birdhouse that whistled. Still, A for effort. You follow the envoy as he's reluctantly escorted into a shaded hall for supper. The moment he steps through the wind-regulated vestibule and into the softly chilled interior, his eyes widen. He's smitten. He practically melts into a cushion and begins to babble praise for Persian design, while sipping cold date syrup from a ceramic goblet. It's less diplomacy, more thermal surrender. You settle into a corner, half listening to the meal unfold. He peppers his hosts with questions about wall thickness, roof angles, and the magic of moon ice, the nickname he's given to the nighttime, frozen water from the desert ice trays. His hosts smile politely, exchanging amused glances. They're used to this. Foreigners lose their minds over the comfort levels here. You'd think he'd be curious about the empire's vast military power, its economic genius, or its spiritual philosophies. But no, his entire diplomatic report will be a 12-page scroll on the miracle of indoor breezes and fruit that remains firm past midday. At one point, the envoy sneaks away from dinner and tries to measure the wind speed inside a bathhouse. He fails, mostly because he brought a feather quill and no method, but you can't fault the enthusiasm. And here's a nugget of nerdy gold. Some of these Greek visitors weren't just diplomats. They were scholars. One or two may have returned with early sketches that influenced Hellenistic bathhouse design or inspired the ventilated atriums of later Roman villas. It's not the stuff of epic poetry, but who needs war stories when you can export shade? Back in the garden, the envoy reclines and scribbles a final note. If nothing else, Persia has tamed the sky. He blows on the ink to dry it, unaware that the breeze drying his page is part of the very magic he's trying to describe. As the night deepens, he falls asleep right there under the vines, scroll tucked beneath his arm, snoring like a man who's just realized everything he thought he knew about hot weather was a lie. You watch him for a while, then return to your favorite bench, where the air is still soft and sweet. Somewhere nearby, another envoy is probably having the same epiphany. Cold air, warm hospitality, and architecture that outsmarts the sun. Welcome to Persia, where the real power isn't in the sword, but in the chill. You awaken to the gentle sound of sandals on stone and the soft creak of a wooden shutter swinging open in the breeze. The sun's barely up, and already the village is alive. But this isn't a palace, and you're not surrounded by ornate tiles and perfumed air. This is the countryside, simple homes, sun, baked streets, and clay windcatchers that look like they were built by someone's great-grandparent with more hope than precision. And yet, it's cool inside. You're standing in the living space of a modest village family. The walls are plain, the furniture sparse, but overhead, a modest windcatcher hums quietly, pulling the morning breeze through the home like a whispered secret. It's smaller than those in the city, more like a whisper of a badger than a shout, but it works. And that's the surprise. You expected ancient Persian cooling to be a palace perk, a rich people thing. But here, in this humble setting, there's clay jars chilling in shaded corners, floor vents cooling sleeping mats, and a homemade reed screen dampened with well water hanging in front of the breeze path. It's DIY desert engineering. You step outside. All around you, similar homes display the same science, vents angled just so, sun, shades constructed from woven reeds, wind catchers poking up like chimney hats. You begin to wonder, was this really common? Did everyone have access to this ancient air magic? Historians still argue whether wind catchers and yakchals were widespread among the lower classes, or if what you're seeing now is the result of later adaptations. Some believe simpler versions were indeed common in rural areas, passed down through community know-how rather than royal blueprints. Others argue these villages are exceptional, outliers that retained old knowledge better than the cities that once pioneered it. But here's a delightful, quirky truth in some regions. Wind catchers were seen as status neutral. What mattered wasn't whether you had one, but how well yours worked. There were village contests, unofficial, of course, over whose badger caught the most breeze. Some even painted theirs in elaborate patterns, not for show, but to signal pride in their homes. Cool rating. You wander down a narrow path between homes. A small boy beckons you into his family's garden, where an ancient Yakshal dome leans gently to one side like it's had a long week. It's barely 5 feet tall and probably holds more bugs than ice at this point. But the principle remains even here, even now, people are still using these passive technologies. A woman nearby pulls fresh herbs from a low shelf built into the garden wall. The shelf is shaded by a small water trough, and air flows over the damp clay to cool it. No wind catcher needed. It's a micro system, as clever as it is quiet. You're invited into another home, this one with a serdab nestled partly into a hillside. The room is lit by a small shaft of indirect light, and cool air rolls in from a floor vent leading to a buried kenat. No palace, no fancy tiles. Just smart construction and centuries of passed down knowledge. You start to notice the differences in design. City wind catchers are about grander angles and airflow mathematics. Village badgers are about survival, shorter, wider, with fewer vanes but still enough to make a difference. And the homes are built close together, creating narrow alleys that channel wind like rivers of air. Shade, shade, shade. Every corner, every overhang, optimized for it. One older man pulls you aside, showing you a book of sketch diagrams, his own experiments with airflow. He's a retired mason, now part-time inventor, and his latest contraption involves a wind catcher combined with a clay pot fridge for keeping milk from soaring. He beams like he's cracked a divine code. Here's a curiosity: in some villages, wind catchers were paired with traditional storytelling. Children gathered beneath the cool draft, while elders spun tales of ancient engineers and wind spirits. Cooling and culture, braided together like strands of a rope that still holds. You rest again, now under the shadow of a fig tree. Around you, the village moves in a rhythm tuned to sun and shadow. The market opens early and closes before the noon blaze. Cooking is done outdoors, in shaded courtyards or beside vents that sweep smoke and heat away. And every home, rich or poor, breathes with the land. No one here brags about their ice or their wind. It just is. It works. It's lived in brilliance. And as you lean back and feel the breeze kiss your cheek, you realize something important. While emperors may have had the most spectacular wind catchers, it was ordinary people who made them essential. You stretch beneath the fig tree as the day stretches with you, the sun high and blinding. But the breeze, bless it, still filtering through alleyways and shaded walls. It feels like this timeless comfort will last forever. But as you wander into the next village over, a sobering truth begins to settle in your chest. Like wind gone still. Many of the towers are silent now. You pass a badger that once rose proudly from a rooftop, now chipped and leaning, vines creeping up its base like slow ruin. There's no breeze anymore, just a staleness in the air that wasn't there before. The dome of a yakshal nearby is cracked, a weathered tarp clumsily stretched across its opening. The past is still here. It's just tired. You speak with an old man sitting beneath the broken tower. He sighs as he tells you about the day they installed their first electric fan. We celebrated, he says, but we didn't realize what we were losing. For a time, the ancient systems were left behind. Concrete replaced clay. A sea units hummed where wind used to sing. People chased the future, forgetting the genius of the past. Historians still argue whether the decline of passive cooling was inevitable with the rise of modern technology, or if it was a failure of cultural memory. A generation too eager to replace, not repair. In truth, it was probably both. Progress doesn't always look in the rearview mirror. You wander deeper into the town, where some badgers have been sealed off entirely, filled with bricks or covered by metal sheeting. Too dusty, someone says. Too much maintenance, says another. It's like hearing someone say they boarded up a cathedral because the incense was too strong, but then you catch something. A sound, a whisper, air moving. You turn a corner and step into a narrow street where the towers still stand tall, not pristine, but proud. A few homes here never gave up. You duck into one, and the temperature drops just like before. A boy waves at you from under a fan of reeds, cooling his feet in a shallow basin while the wind hums softly overhead. This pocket of resilience tells another story, not of collapse, but of stubborn continuity. Some families never stop teaching their children how to maintain a wind catcher, how to balance clay ratios, how to listen to the wind like it's speaking a language you've almost forgotten. Here's a quirky twist in at least one small village. Badgers were declared cultural heritage monuments by popular vote. That's right. They held a community meeting, took a show of hands, and basically said, "These towers stay." Bureaucracy meets nostalgia, and nostalgia won. You sit with a young mason learning the old techniques. He's patching cracks with a mix passed down by his grandfather. No cement, just mud, ash, straw, and memory. He grins, proud of a restoration project on a particularly wide, angled tower. "This one breathes like a lion," he says. You nod, pretending you understand what lion-breathing architecture means. The energy here is different. Quiet, yes. Humble, always. But alive. You climb one of the towers just before sunset. The stairs are uneven, the plaster worn smooth by generations of feet. At the top, the breeze rushes past your face with a familiar softness. You lean out, and for a moment, just a moment, you see the past and present layered together. The towers, the domes, the people who kept them breathing. Below, in the shadowed streets, someone lights a lantern. Children chase each other between doorways. And in the air, that same gentle current, moving as it always has, the towers may bend, may break, but they are not forgotten, not completely. And in that lingering wind, you feel that legacy isn't always about what's remembered in books. Sometimes, it's what you feel on your skin, what cools you when nothing else can. A breath from 1,000 years ago, still swirling, still trying. Evening deepens now, the sky bleeding from copper to plum, and you find yourself traveling with a different sort of caravan. This one not carrying snow or fruit, but notebooks, blueprints, and laptops. These are modern engineers, architects, and climate scientists, and they've come not to conquer or critique, but to learn, to unearth ancient knowledge buried beneath centuries of concrete and convenience. You trail behind them as they gather around a semi-intact wind tower, all pointing, measuring, and murmuring with that specific academic enthusiasm that makes you want to both join in and run far away. One young architect runs her palm along the plaster, grinning like she just found buried treasure. Because, in a way, she has. This is the revival. In cities like Yazid and Kerman, a movement is stirring. People are peeking into yakshals and badgers, not with nostalgia, but with purpose. They're measuring airflow, scanning ancient domes with 3D LiDAR, building digital models of passive systems that once cooled empires. The new goal? Sustainability, inspired by the old ways. You step into a restored home, now used as a demonstration lab. Inside, sensors track humidity and temperature. One half of the house uses a modern HVAC setup, the other relies solely on its original wind catcher and evaporative basins. Guess which side is quieter, cheaper, and somehow more peaceful. Historians still argue whether these revival efforts are about conservation or innovation. But the architects here will tell you it's both. They're not just preserving, they're adapting. Mixing ancient geometry with new materials, designing buildings that can self-regulate temperature with minimal energy. You're watching old tech meet climate crisis and say, "Let me help." Here's a quirky little spin. One Iranian startup is now manufacturing prefab wind catchers designed to snap into modern homes like oversized Lego bricks. They come in a crate, and within hours, you've got a functioning breeze funnel on your roof. Shipping not included, of course. You're ushered toward a new construction site, an eco-housing complex designed entirely around passive cooling. The homes are positioned to align with regional wind patterns, just like in the old cities. Their walls are layered with insulated mud brick facades, and every unit has its own yakshal, inspired cold storage chamber. Not for snow this time, just groceries, meds, maybe a fancy cheese board. In one unit, you meet a young couple proudly showing off their home. They explain how their utility bills are a fraction of their old apartments. It's not just cheaper, the woman says. It's healthier. The air feels alive. You nod. You felt it too. You find a student architect sketching under a fig tree, her notebook filled with wind diagrams and poetry. Bejurs, she writes, air like lungs for buildings. You sit beside her, and she shows you a model she's working on, an office complex that breathes like a garden, powered only by breeze and shade. It looks like science fiction, but she swears it's already under construction in Tehran. All around, you sense it the shift. People remembering that climate control wasn't always noisy machines and sealed windows. That architecture could be gentle, responsive, intimate. Not fighting the environment, but dancing with it. Here's your final surprise of the evening. A local university has started offering a full degree in vernacular thermal architecture. The syllabus includes fieldwork in ancient cities, clay mixing workshops, even a class called Wind Water and Whisper, designing for silence. Yes, really. As you stroll back toward the village edge, your path lit by low lanterns and the occasional blinking sensor light, you feel a strange optimism. The towers may have fallen, the ice may melt, but the knowledge, it's stirring. Rising again, one breeze at a time, you pass a small home with a brand new wind catcher installed just last week. A child sticks her hand into the draft and laughs. Her grandfather nods, satisfied. She'll learn, he says. She'll remember. And that's the point, isn't it? Not to build something that lasts forever, but something worth reviving when the world forgets. You arrive back where it all began, just outside the village, under a moon that looks eerily familiar, like it's been watching you this whole time. And maybe it has. Tonight, you've been invited somewhere special, somewhere very few get to enter anymore. The last functional yakshal in this part of Persia. It rises like a ghost of time, pale and massive, its dome cracked but holding. The path to it is lined with quiet lanterns, and an old man meets you at the narrow entrance. He gestures silently, and you step inside. The drop in temperature is immediate, like slipping into memory. The air is still, damp, fragrant with centuries of clay, straw, and the ghost of old snow. You follow a winding ramp down, the walls glowing softly with reflected moonlight through a narrow shaft above. There's no sound but your own breath and the faintest drip of condensation from somewhere in the shadows. At the bottom, you sit. You are alone, inside a dome that once held enough ice to chill an entire community. And even now, without a single block of snow, it holds its chill. The architecture doesn't need to try. It simply is. Thick walls, gentle curves, perfectly calculated ventilation, created not in labs but through trial, error, and obsession. You stretch out on a cool stone bench carved into the wall, staring up at the ribs of the dome above. There's something deeply comforting in this space. A quiet permanence. A sense that the people who built it truly understood how to live with the land, not against it. Historians still argue whether structures like this were more practical or spiritual in purpose. Was it just ice storage? Or was it a kind of temple to balance, to nature, to humility in the face of fire and wind? Here's one final quirky note. The locals still leave offerings here sometimes. Not flowers or coins, but things like fresh water, herbs, or a particularly well-formed piece of straw. Small tributes to the dome that once gave them comfort when the world outside sizzled. You feel it too, that comfort. The calm, unwavering presence of a structure built not just with hands, but with wisdom. The breeze from the shaft above whispers across your face. Faint, but deliberate, as if the badger still works, still breathes, even in sleep. You lie down fully, the stone cool beneath your back, your eyes adjusting to the soft dark. And slowly, everything fades: the markets, the towers, the snow, laden camels, the arguing engineers, the Greek envoy, and his sweaty notebook. Just you, and the wind, and the quiet beat of a 1,000-year-old rhythm that never really stopped. Let the last of the story ease away now. The breeze that has followed you through deserts, domes, gardens, and grand halls softens into a sigh. No more towers to climb, no more stones to trace. Only the hush of ancient air, gliding over the skin like cool silk, wrapping you in a memory too old to name. Your thoughts slow, dissolving into the silence held by those thick earthen walls. Even your breath feels quieter, like the yakshal itself is listening, nodding in approval as you sink deeper into stillness. The temperature of the past has settled into your bones. Not cold, not warm, but just right. The exact shade of comfort. Imagine the wind towers spinning slowly above you, catching the last star, whispers of the night. They don't speak loudly, these towers. They don't glow. They don't buzz. They simply work. They hum in harmony with earth and sky, cooling not just air, but anxiety. And now that hum becomes yours. Let it rock you. Let it carry you across sand, across time, to places not marked on maps, but etched softly into your sense of peace. You're not just in an ancient dome anymore. You're inside a cradle of cleverness, humility, and the deep, gentle art of staying calm. Staying cool. Sleep now, traveler of breeze and brick.